It was a quiet Saturday afternoon in Riverton Heights, the kind of day where the sun hung lazily in the sky, casting long shadows across the park. The air smelled like freshly cut grass, and kids could be heard laughing as they chased each other around the playground. For 16-year-old Maya, this was her favorite time of the week, a chance to step away from school stress and spend some quality moments with her golden retriever. Max. Max wasn't just any dog. He was family. He had been by her side since she was 8 years old, a gift from her dad on his last birthday before becoming mayor. That alone made Max special. Every evening, rain or shine, Maya would take him for walks through their neighborhood park. It was their routine, something they both looked forward to. But today, everything changed as Maya strolled along the familiar path. Max trotted happily beside her, his tail wagging like it always did when he was outside. She paused near a bench to let him sniff around, keeping an eye on him while scrolling absent-mindedly through her phone. Life felt peaceful until two police officers appeared out of nowhere, walking briskly toward them. Their expressions were tense, almost hostile. "Ma'am," one of them called out sharply, "is that your dog?" Maya nodded, confused. "Yes, why? Is there a problem?" The officer pointed at Max, who was standing calmly next to Maya, still sniffing the ground. "He needs to be leashed." Maya blinked, glancing down at the leash already securely attached to Max's collar. "He is leashed," she said, holding up the leash for them to see. Her voice wavered slightly, unsure of what was happening. But instead of acknowledging her explanation, the second officer stepped closer, hand resting ominously on the holster of his gun. "We got reports about a suspicious person walking a large dog here," he said sternly. "You need to control your animal." Maya froze. Suspicious? Control? What were they talking about? Max hadn't done anything wrong. He was just being himself, curious and friendly. She tried to explain again, her voice firmer this time. "There's no reason to worry. He's not aggressive. Look, he's fine." But the officers weren't listening. One of them shouted something about the dog acting unpredictably, though Maya couldn't understand how anyone could think Max was dangerous. Before she knew it, things escalated faster than she could process. One officer raised his weapon, pointing it directly at Max. Panic surged through Maya's body. "No!" she screamed, stepping between the officer and her dog. "Please, don't hurt him. He didn't do anything." Her cries fell on deaf ears. Shots rang out, sharp and deafening. Time seemed to slow down as Maya watched in horror, unable to move, unable to stop what was happening. Max yelped once, a sound so heartbreaking it echoed in her ears, and then collapsed onto the ground. Blood pooled beneath him, staining the green grass red. For a moment, everything went silent. Maya dropped to her knees, tears streaming down her face as she cradled Max's limp body. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what had just happened. How could this have gone so wrong? Why did they shoot him? None of it made sense. People nearby had stopped what they were doing, staring in shock. Some pulled out their phones, recording the scene. Others approached cautiously, murmuring words of comfort to Maya, but none of it mattered. Nothing could undo what had happened. Max was gone, taken away from her in the most senseless way possible. As reality sank in, anger bubbled inside her chest. This wasn't fair. Max hadn't deserved this. No one deserved to lose someone they loved like that. And yet, here she was, kneeling on the cold earth, clutching the lifeless body of her best friend. Her hands trembled as she fumbled for her phone. There was only one person she could call now, the one person who might actually be able to do something about this. With shaking fingers, she dialed her father's number. He answered on the third ring, his deep voice calm and steady. "Hey, sweetheart," he said warmly. "What's up?" Maya choked back a sob, struggling to find the words. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked under the weight of her emotions. "Dad, they killed Max." There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by a sharp intake of breath. "What?" he asked, disbelief coloring his tone. "Who killed Max? Where are you?" She told him everything, the officers, the accusations, the gunshots. By the time she finished, her father was already moving, promising to get there as fast as he could. As she hung up, Maya realized something important. This wasn't just about her and Max anymore. This was bigger. Bigger than her grief. Bigger than her pain. Because if this could happen to her, it could happen to anyone. And maybe, just maybe, her dad, the mayor, could help ensure it never happened again. Sitting there on the grass, surrounded by strangers in the fading warmth of the afternoon sun, Maya made a silent vow. Max wouldn't die in vain. Somehow, someway, she would turn this tragedy into something meaningful. The call to her father felt like a lifeline in the middle of chaos. Maya sat on the grass, clutching her phone tightly, tears streaming down her face as she replayed the conversation in her head. Her dad's voice had been calm but firm, reassuring her that he was coming and that they would figure this out together. But even his words couldn't dull the sharp ache in her chest. Max was gone, and no matter what happened next, nothing could bring him back. As she waited for her father to arrive, the park began to transform around her. People who had been watching from a distance started gathering closer, their faces filled with shock and anger. Some were filming the scene on their phones, capturing every detail: the blood-stained grass, the lifeless body of Max, and Maya sitting there, broken and devastated. A few tried to comfort her, offering hugs or kind words, but Maya barely registered them. Her mind was still stuck on the moments leading up to the shooting, replaying it over and over like a terrible movie she couldn't turn off. When her father finally arrived, it was hard not to notice the commotion he caused. Derek Williams wasn't just any man. He was the mayor of Riverton Heights. His presence commanded attention, and within minutes, reporters and cameras seemed to appear out of nowhere. The news of what had happened had already spread quickly through social media, thanks to the videos people had posted online. By the time Derek stepped out of his car, the hashtag Justice for Max was trending locally, and the story was beginning to make waves far beyond the small town. Derek moved swiftly toward Maya, dropping to one knee beside her. For a moment, he didn't say anything, just wrapped his arms around her as she sobbed into his shoulder. It was a rare display of vulnerability for someone known for his composed demeanor in public. But here, surrounded by strangers and the remnants of an unthinkable tragedy, he allowed himself to grieve alongside his daughter. Once Maya calmed down enough to speak, she recounted everything that had happened. She told him about the officers' approach, their accusations, and how quickly things had spiraled out of control. Derek listened intently, his jaw tightening with each word. When she finished, he stood up, his expression unreadable but his eyes blazing with determination. "This isn't right," he said firmly, glancing at the growing crowd of onlookers. "We're going to fix this." With those words, Derek took charge of the situation. He spoke briefly with the officers at the scene, demanding answers while making it clear that this incident wouldn't be swept under the rug. Then, turning to the reporters who had gathered, he addressed the public directly. Standing tall despite the weight of the moment, he promised transparency and accountability. "This is my daughter," he said, gesturing toward Maya, who stood quietly behind him. "And today, she lost her best friend because of reckless actions. We will get to the bottom of this, and we will ensure that justice is served, not just for Max, but for everyone affected by incidents like this." The statement sent ripples through the community. Some cheered, grateful to see a leader taking a stand. Others remained skeptical, wondering if Derek's promise would amount to anything more than empty words. After all, cases involving police misconduct rarely ended in convictions, especially in small towns where law enforcement often held significant power. Back at home later that evening, Derek and Maya sat together in the living room, the house. Eerily quiet except for the occasional hum of traffic outside. Maya curled up on the couch, clutching a blanket tightly around her shoulders. Her eyes were red and swollen, but there was something new in her gaze, a flicker of resolve. "I don't want this to happen to anyone else," she said softly, breaking the silence. "Not another dog, not another person." Derek nodded, leaning forward in his seat. "I know, sweetheart. And I promise you, we'll do everything we can to make sure it doesn't." But the road ahead wouldn't be easy. As the days passed, the fallout from the incident grew more intense. Videos of the shooting continued to circulate online, sparking outrage across the country. Protesters began organizing rallies in Riverton Heights, calling for justice and reform. Meanwhile, critics accused Derek of using the tragedy for political gain, questioning whether he truly cared about accountability or if he was simply trying to protect his family's reputation. At school, Maya found herself at the center of unwanted attention. Classmates whispered about her wherever she went, some offering condolences, others casting judgmental stares. Teachers treated her with kid gloves, unsure of how to handle the situation. It was exhausting, but Maya refused to let it break her. If anything, the scrutiny only strengthened her resolve. One night, unable to sleep, Maya scrolled through her phone, reading comments on the viral videos of Max's death. Most were supportive, praising her courage and demanding action. But there were also hateful messages, accusing her of exaggeration or blaming Max for supposedly provoking the officers. Each hateful comment felt like a punch to the gut, but Maya forced herself to keep scrolling. She needed to understand the full scope of what had happened, not just for herself, but for Max. By the end of the week, the protests had grown larger and louder. Hundreds of people marched through the streets of Riverton Heights, holding signs that read "Stop Police Brutality" and "Justice for Innocent Lives." Maya joined them, standing at the front of the crowd alongside her father. Together, they became symbols of hope and resilience, inspiring others to speak out against injustice. Despite the chaos swirling around her, Maya found solace in knowing that Max's death hadn't been in vain. Every chant, every protest, every shared video brought them one step closer to real change. And though the pain of losing him never fully faded, Maya began to channel her grief into action. This wasn't just about Max anymore, it was about creating a world where no one else had to suffer the same loss. As the sun set over Riverton Heights, casting a warm golden glow over the town, Maya stood hand in hand with her father, ready to face whatever came next. They weren't just fighting for justice, they were fighting for a better future. One where love triumphed over fear and where stories like Max's would become a thing of the past. The protests in Riverton Heights grew louder with each passing day. What started as a small gathering of concerned citizens quickly turned into a massive movement, drawing people from all walks of life. The streets were filled with voices chanting for justice, holding up signs that demanded accountability and change. At the heart of it all was Maya, just 16 years old but already a symbol of courage and resilience. Every morning, Maya woke up feeling a mix of emotions: sadness over losing Max, anger at the injustice, and determination to keep fighting. She knew this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everyone who had ever felt powerless against systems that seemed unbeatable. Her father, Derek, stood by her side every step of the way, but he faced his own battles behind closed doors. As the mayor, he had to navigate a minefield of politics, public opinion, and pressure from law enforcement. It wasn't easy, but neither of them backed down. One of the biggest challenges came when the police department issued its first official statement. According to the officers involved, Max had been acting aggressively and posed a threat. They claimed they had no choice but to use lethal force. But the videos told a different story. Footage captured by bystanders showed Max calmly sniffing the ground, oblivious to the tension building around him. There was no growling, no lunging, nothing that even remotely suggested aggression. When the statement hit the news, outrage erupted. People took to social media, calling out the blatant contradictions. Protesters added new slogans to their chants. Lies won't silence us, and show us the truth. Even those who hadn't been paying attention before started asking questions. How could two officers see aggression where none existed? Why did situations like this keep happening? Derek called an emergency press conference to address the growing unrest. Standing in front of a podium surrounded by cameras, he looked tired but resolute. He began by acknowledging the pain his daughter and so many others were feeling. Then, he made a bold declaration. "We cannot move forward without transparency," he said, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "I am calling for an independent investigation into this incident. Not only will we examine what happened to Max, but we will also review our policies on police conduct and use of force." The crowd erupted in applause, but not everyone was happy. Some members of the city council accused Derek of undermining law enforcement, while others questioned whether an independent investigation would actually lead to real change. Behind the scenes, tensions between Derek and the police chief reached a boiling point. The chief argued that the officers followed protocol, while Derek insisted that protocols needed to change. At home, Maya watched the fallout unfold on TV, shaking her head at the arguments playing out on screen. To her, it all felt so frustratingly familiar. She'd seen stories like hers before, young people, often from marginalized communities whose lives were upended by unchecked power. This time, though, she wasn't going to stay silent. She decided to take matters into her own hands. Maya reached out to local activists and community leaders, asking for advice on how to amplify her message. They encouraged her to share her story publicly, not just through interviews or statements, but by joining the protests herself. At first, the idea terrified her. Public speaking wasn't exactly her strong suit, and the thought of standing in front of hundreds or even thousands of people made her stomach churn. But something inside her clicked. If she wanted real change, she couldn't afford to hold back. Her first speech came during a rally held in the park where Max had died. Hundreds of people gathered under the late afternoon sun, holding candles and flowers in memory of Max. When Maya stepped onto the makeshift stage, the crowd fell silent. For a moment, she froze, clutching the microphone tightly as her heart pounded in her chest. Then, taking a deep breath, she began to speak. "I never thought I'd be here today," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm just a regular kid who loved her dog more than anything. Max wasn't just a pet, he was family. And now he's gone because of decisions made by people who didn't bother to understand him." She paused, swallowing hard as tears welled up in her eyes. The crowd remained still, hanging on her every word. "But this isn't just about Max," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "This is about all the times we've been told to stay quiet, to accept things as they are. It's about the fear that comes when you realize your voice might not matter. Well, I'm done being afraid. We deserve better. Our families deserve better. And if I have to stand here and scream until someone listens, then that's what I'll do." By the time she finished, the entire crowd was on its feet, cheering and clapping. Strangers hugged her, thanking her for speaking out. For the first time since Max's death, Maya felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, her words could spark real change. As the days went on, Maya became a regular presence at protests and rallies. She spoke passionately about the need for reform, sharing personal stories that resonated deeply with others. Her courage inspired people to open up about their own experiences, stories of loved ones lost, of fear and frustration, of wanting to believe in a fairer world. But it wasn't all support and encouragement. Alongside the praise came criticism and threats. Anonymous messages flooded social media, accusing Maya of exaggerating the situation or seeking attention. Some even targeted her father, claiming he was exploiting his daughter's grief for political gain. Security details were assigned to protect the family, adding another layer of stress to an already overwhelming situation. Despite the negativity, Maya refused to let it break her. Instead, she leaned on the people around her, the activists who mentored her, the friends who stood by her side, and most importantly, her dad. Together they weathered the storm, finding strength in their shared mission. Behind the scenes, Derek worked tirelessly to push for reforms. He proposed measures like mandatory de-escalation training for officers, increased accountability through body cameras, and the creation of an independent oversight board to monitor police conduct. Each proposal faced fierce resistance, but Derek held firm, knowing that compromise wasn't an option. For Maya, watching her father fight alongside her was both inspiring and humbling. He wasn't perfect, and there were moments when doubt crept in for both of them. But they reminded themselves why they were doing this. Every sleepless night, every heated argument, every tear shed was for Max, and for everyone else who deserved a safer, fairer world. As the weeks turned into months, Riverton Heights transformed. Conversations about police accountability became part of everyday life. Schools hosted discussions, churches prayed for healing, and businesses displayed signs supporting reform. Slowly but surely, the movement gained momentum, fueled by Maya's courage and Derek's leadership. Through it all, Maya carried Max's memory with her everywhere she went. She wore a bracelet engraved with his name, a constant reminder of why she kept fighting. Sometimes, late at night, she'd sit outside and talk to him as if he were still there, telling him about the rallies, the speeches, and the progress they were making. It was her way of keeping him close, of ensuring that his legacy lived on, and though the road ahead remained uncertain, one thing was clear: Maya wasn't giving up. Neither was her dad. Together they were determined to turn tragedy into triumph too, create a future where no one else had to lose someone they loved because of fear, misunderstanding, or unchecked power. The trial finally began after months of anticipation, turning Riverton Heights into a battleground of emotions. The courtroom was packed every day, filled with reporters scribbling notes, activists holding their breath, and ordinary citizens desperate for justice. For Maya, sitting in that room felt like reliving the worst day of her life over and over again. Each testimony, each piece of evidence brought back memories she wished she could forget: the sound of gunshots, the sight of Max lying motionless on the ground, the weight of her own helplessness. The prosecution painted a clear picture. Officers had acted recklessly, escalating a harmless situation into tragedy. They argued that there was no justification for using lethal force against an animal that posed no threat. Videos from bystanders were shown repeatedly, highlighting how calm Max had been before the shooting. Witnesses testified about the officers' aggression, describing how they ignored Maya's pleas and fired without hesitation, but the defense fought back fiercely. Their lawyers claimed the officers were following protocol, insisting that Max's size and behavior made him unpredictable. They argued that the officers had feared for their safety and acted accordingly. It was a familiar narrative, one that often shielded law enforcement from accountability, but this time it didn't sit well with everyone. People in the courtroom exchanged skeptical glances. shaking their heads at the contradictions between what they saw in the videos and what the defense was saying. Maya sat quietly through it all, clutching her father's hand tightly whenever things got overwhelming. She tried to focus on the facts, but it was hard not to let her emotions take over. Every mention of Max's name sent a pang through her chest. Every attempt by the defense to justify the shooting made her blood boil. Still, she refused to look away. This wasn't just about her anymore, it was about setting a precedent, showing the world that even small victories mattered. Outside the courtroom, the protests continued. Hundreds gathered daily, chanting slogans and holding up pictures of Max. Some carried signs with messages like "Enough is enough" and "Accountability starts now." Others wore t-shirts printed with Max's face, turning his memory into a symbol of hope and resistance. Maya attended as many rallies as she could, finding strength in the unity of strangers who shared her pain. One evening, after a particularly grueling day in court, Maya stood on a makeshift stage at one of these protests. Her voice trembled as she addressed the crowd, thanking them for their support and reminding them why they were fighting. "This isn't just about Max," she said, her words echoing through the streets. "It's about every person who has ever felt powerless, every family that has lost someone because of fear or misunderstanding. We're here to say it stops now." Her speech earned thunderous applause, but it also drew backlash. Critics accused her of playing the victim, while others dismissed the movement as overblown. Online trolls flooded social media with hateful comments, targeting both Maya and her father. One message read, "Your dog isn't worth all this drama." Another mocked her for speaking out, calling her a pawn in her father's political game. Reading those words stung, but Maya refused to let them silence her. If anything, they fueled her determination to keep going. Behind closed doors, Derek faced his own struggles. As mayor, he was caught between two opposing forces: the community demanding change and the police department resisting reform. Meetings with the city council became heated debates, with some members accusing him of prioritizing his family over the town's safety. Even allies questioned whether pushing for reforms mid-trial might alienate voters. But Derek remained steadfast, reminding himself and anyone who doubted him that leadership meant doing what was right, not what was easy. At home, the atmosphere was tense but united. Maya and Derek spent hours discussing strategies, drafting statements, and preparing for whatever came next. They leaned on each other during the toughest moments, finding solace in their shared mission. Late at night, when the house was quiet, Maya would sit outside under the stars, talking to Max as if he were still there. She'd tell him about the trial, the protests, and the progress they were making. It was her way of keeping his memory alive, of ensuring that his death wasn't forgotten. As the trial dragged on, tensions reached a breaking point. The jury deliberations took longer than expected, leaving everyone on edge. Reporters camped outside the courthouse, speculating endlessly about the outcome. Activists braced themselves for disappointment, fearing another instance where justice slipped through their fingers. Maya alternated between hope and dread, unsure of what to expect. All she knew was that she had done everything she could spoken out, rallied supporters, pushed for reforms, and now the rest was out of her hands. Finally, the verdict came. The courtroom buzzed with nervous energy as the judge called everyone to order. When the foreman stood up to deliver the decision, time seemed to freeze. Guilty. Both officers were found guilty of excessive force and animal cruelty. A wave of relief washed over Maya, followed by tears she couldn't hold back. Her father wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close as cheers erupted outside the courthouse. For Maya, the conviction was more than just a legal win, it was validation. It proved that people cared, that voices like hers mattered. But she also knew the fight wasn't over. Justice for Max was important, but true change required more than one verdict. It meant addressing systemic issues, challenging outdated policies, and building trust between communities and law enforcement. And Maya was ready to keep pushing for that. In the days following the trial, Riverton Heights began to heal. Protesters celebrated the outcome, hailing it as a step toward accountability. Conversations about reform gained momentum, with more people joining the call for change. Mayor Derek Williams wasted no time implementing new measures: mandatory de-escalation, training for officers, increased transparency through body cameras, and the creation of an independent oversight board. These changes didn't erase the past, but they offered hope for a better future. For Maya, life slowly returned to a sense of normalcy, or as close to normal as it could be. She continued advocating for justice, speaking at events and mentoring young activists inspired by her courage. Max's memory lived on in everything she did, guiding her forward even when the road felt uncertain. Together, Maya and her father proved that sometimes the smallest acts of bravery can spark the biggest movements. The verdict sent shockwaves through Riverton Heights. When the foreman's voice rang out, guilty on all counts, a collective gasp filled the courtroom. For Maya, it was a moment of both relief and heartbreak. Relief because justice had finally been served, heartbreak because no verdict could bring Max back. As cheers erupted outside the courthouse, she sat quietly in her seat, tears streaming down her face. Her father held her hand tightly, his own eyes glistening with emotion. Outside, the crowd erupted into chants of victory. "Justice for Max!" they shouted, their voices echoing through the streets. Strangers hugged each other, some crying, others raising fists in triumph. It was a rare win, a conviction in a case involving police misconduct, and it felt monumental. Reporters scrambled to capture reactions, thrusting microphones toward anyone willing to speak. Activists who had stood by Maya from the beginning celebrated the outcome as proof that change was possible, even in the face of overwhelming odds. But for Maya, the celebration felt bittersweet. She stepped outside the courthouse, flanked by her father and a small group of supporters. The air buzzed with energy, but Maya's thoughts were elsewhere. All she could think about was Max, how he used to wag his tail whenever he saw her, how he'd nudge her hand for attention during quiet afternoons at home. Now, all that remained were memories and the lessons he left behind. Standing there amidst the cheering crowd, Maya realized something important. This wasn't just about her or Max anymore. This was about everyone who had ever felt powerless against systems designed to protect the powerful. It was about every family that had lost a loved one, not just dogs, but people because of unchecked authority. And if she could channel her pain into action, maybe she could help prevent others from experiencing the same loss. In the weeks following the trial, Maya threw herself into advocacy work. She partnered with local organizations to push for broader reforms, focusing not only on policing but also on animal welfare and community safety. Her father supported her efforts wholeheartedly, using his position as mayor to amplify her message. Together, they worked tirelessly to ensure that the changes implemented in Riverton Heights weren't just temporary fixes but lasting solutions. One of Maya's biggest projects was creating an organization dedicated to preventing similar tragedies. She called it Max's Legacy, honoring the dog who had changed her life forever. The nonprofit focused on 3 key areas: promoting humane treatment of animals, advocating for accountability in law enforcement, and providing resources for families affected by violence. Through fundraisers, workshops, and campaigns, Max's Legacy quickly gained traction, drawing support from across the country. Maya became a regular presence at events, speaking passionately about the need for empathy and understanding. She shared her story openly, reminding audiences that real change often starts with personal tragedy. At one event, she brought along a photo album filled with pictures of Maxim playing fetch, lounging on the couch and trotting happily beside her on their walks. As she flipped through the pages, her voice softened. "This is why I'm here," she said, pointing to a picture of Max mid-leap, catching a frisbee. "He taught me what unconditional love looks like. He taught me to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. And now I want to honor him by helping others." Her words resonated deeply, inspiring people to take action in their own communities. Schools invited her to speak to students about kindness and resilience. Churches prayed for healing and unity. Businesses donated funds to support Max's legacy, turning a personal tragedy into a movement for good. Of course, not everything went smoothly. Critics still questioned whether the reforms would actually make a difference. Some accused Maya and her father of grandstanding, claiming they cared more about headlines than real progress. Online trolls continued to target them, posting cruel comments and spreading misinformation. But Maya refused to let negativity derail her mission. Instead, she leaned on the people who believed in her, the activists who mentored her, the friends who stood by her side, and the countless strangers who reached out to share their stories. Her relationship with her father grew stronger through it all. Derek faced immense pressure as mayor, balancing the demands of his job with the expectations of a grieving daughter. There were moments when doubt crept in for both of them, but they reminded themselves why they were doing this. Every sleepless night, every heated argument, every tear shed was for Max, and for everyone else who deserved a safer, fairer world. As months turned into years, Riverton Heights began to transform. Conversations about police accountability became part of everyday life. Schools hosted discussions about systemic issues, encouraging students to think critically about power and privilege. Churches organized prayer vigils for victims of violence, calling for compassion and healing. Even businesses got involved, displaying signs supporting reform and hosting fundraisers for Max's legacy. For Maya, watching these changes unfold was both humbling and empowering. She knew the road ahead wouldn't always be easy. There would still be setbacks, challenges, and moments of doubt, but she also knew that progress was possible. Every policy change, every new partnership, every person inspired to speak out was a step in the right direction. On the anniversary of Max's death, Maya visited the park where it had all happened. The grass was green again, free of the bloodstains that once marred it. She carried a bouquet of flowers and a small plaque engraved with Max's name. Kneeling down, she placed them gently on the ground, whispering a quiet thank you. "Thank you for teaching me how to love," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "And thank you for giving me the strength to fight for what's right. I promise I'll keep going for you, for everyone else who deserves justice." As she stood up, she noticed a group of children playing nearby, their laughter filling the air. A golden retriever bounded alongside them, its tail wagging furiously. For a moment, Maya felt a pang of sadness, but then she smiled. Max's spirit lived on, not just in her heart, but in the ripple effect of change he had inspired. His death hadn't been in vain. Walking away from the park, Maya felt a renewed sense of purpose. The journey wasn't over, it might never truly end, but she was ready to face whatever came next. Because sometimes the smallest acts of bravery can spark the biggest movements. And sometimes the memory of a beloved dog can inspire a town and a nation to dream of a better future.